this morning is from John chapter 12, verses 1 to 8. Jesus anointed at Bethany. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honour. Martha served, while Lazarus was amongst those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It is worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
It's an incredible story. Well, it's more than a story, it's an account. I don't like using that word story anymore. But here we have an incredible passage. And what we're at is the beginning of the Holy Week. And I wonder if you picked that up. It was 6 days before the Passover. The post-Passover, of course, was the time where the sacrificial lamb would be offered. And remember, right back when Jesus was baptized, John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And so here we have this image of Christ coming as a lamb to bear our sin upon the cross so that we could have salvation and a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, it gets a little bit confusing because Jewish days are different to our days. We go midnight to midnight. That's a day. At 1 a.m. it's an hour into the next day. But not so with the Jewish people. They go from sunset to sunset. And so round about this time of year it'll be about 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. the next day is a day. And so here it is. It's the just after sunset, they're going into supper, so it's already night. And it is the very beginning of that day, 6 days. And so also they have an expression which we translate as the next day, but it's more likely in the morning. And so when the triumphant entry comes, which we're going to look at next week, our Bibles will say the next day, but in actual fact it's only in 12 hours' time. It's not in 36 hours' time. So we need to understand that as well. And so we tend to do it because it works for us, because we think 12 to 12, and then when you start thinking about it, it gets really confusing. But what this is talking about, this is the evening before the triumphant entry. We have this happening. Now it tells us that they were at a place called Bethany. And Bethany is a little town. It would now be an inner city suburb. It'd be a bit like Fortitude Valley is to Brisbane, we would call that almost the big smoke, wouldn't we, these days? Well, in Jerusalem, Bethany would be very close. Probably as close as the valley would be in Brisbane city. That's about the relationship it had. And so Jesus was staying at this place called Bethany, which of course John had told us about in the previous chapter, where Lazarus had been raised from the dead. And of course this had only happened a few weeks earlier, and everyone was abuzz about that. You know, have you heard? Could you imagine? This guy had been dead. He'd been dead in a tomb for 4 days. And they said, roll away the stone, and his sister says, oh, it's going to stink. Behold the stench. Oh Lord, it stinketh, I think it says in the King James. We can have fun with that. But could you imagine the buzz around the community that here is this guy, Lazarus. He'd been in the grave 4 days, and now that's him walking down the street. People were really, really taken with this. This was about the biggest news since sliced bread. And they didn't even have sliced bread back then to compete with it. So this was great. Now, of course, Mary and Martha, the sisters, they were pretty impressed with this, and they said, hey Lazarus, bring Jesus home. We want to give him a really good feed. And so here it is. They've brought him in, and they're looking after him. Now this is really, I love this passage. And someone pointed this out, actually a lady called Elaine, who'd been a mentor to Michelle for many years. She used to say, you're too much of a Martha, you need to be a bit more of a Mary, was what she would say to Michelle, because Michelle loves doing. And yet we see the dynamics of this family at play in this area. And so Martha is there, and she's in the kitchen, and she's serving, and she's preparing, and I can just imagine all the clutter and bang, you know, there's more hotcakes going onto the griddle, and I don't know, she's chopping up all the lamb and getting all the veggies ready, and she's doing it to her heart's content, because this is the way she says she loves people. I reckon we know a few women like that, don't we? They just love to fuss over people. In fact, there are a lot of people that do that, men and women. We love to fuss over people. That's the way we say, we love you. And then there's Lazarus. He is so chuffed that Jesus is there. There he is. He's sitting at the table with him, and they're yarning, and they're having a great time, kicking back while they're being fussed over, and he is just so happy to be there with his Lord. But then there's Mary. And Mary is just so taken with this Jesus that she's there sitting at his feet. And it's not the first time this happened. It happened very much earlier in the ministry. We find that story recorded for us in Luke chapter 10, where Martha and Mary says, Martha has a go, Lord, don't you care that I'm in the kitchen slaving away? You know, can you tell Mary? And the Lord had to deal with that one. But here we are, we've still got this going. I think Martha's now resigned to the fact that she's serving. Mary's there just at the feet of Jesus. And Lazarus is there just having a good old chat with the Lord. And I think there's an image there. There's an image there of the different types of Christians. You know, some people, they can go to the Lord in prayer, and they can spend hours just pouring out their heart before the Lord. And then there are others, they get before the Lord and they just go, oh Lord. Oh Lord. And half an hour later they're going, oh Lord. And that's about all they've said. Their heart has just been emptied before God. And then there are others that are just so taken with the Lord, they think, what can I do? How can I help? What can I do? You know, they're almost like a Jack Russell dog. They're just bouncing all over the place because they're so excited to serve the Lord. And you know, there's no right or wrong in any of that. There is no better way. They are pouring out their hearts the way they know best to serve the Lord. Now, Now it says here in my Bible that Mary took a pint. Not sure quite how much it is. I think their pints are a little bit different to our pints because I think a pint is about 600 ml, is that right? About 1.5 pints makes a litre, is that correct? Yeah, I think it was probably closer to half a pint from what I can understand. Probably about the amount that you would put in a soft drink can, okay? But it was still incredibly expensive. It's called nard or spiked nard. In the Greek text, it's called myrrhus nardos paticus, and what it means is that it's the perfumed oil of nard that is pure, is the way that it's described. It is the most expensive of all oils. And this oil is really interesting. It had to come all the way from India. So you can imagine bringing this stuff that is rare and only found in certain parts of India. And they had to refine it over there and then carry it for weeks on end. Could you imagine how expensive it would be to get this stuff? And it was really, really treasured. And it was mixed with myrrh. It would be used in the temple as a fragrant offering before the Lord. And so this is really good stuff. And she takes this and she pours it upon the feet of Jesus. And of course we use the name Christ or the Messiah. And Messiah is actually from a Hebrew word, Meshach, and Christ is from Christos, and they mean exactly the same thing. They mean the anointed one. This is starting to make a little bit of sense, isn't it? Here we have Jesus, the anointed one, being anointed. Here we see the scripture being fulfilled, that he would be anointed for his death, that he was the one, the very best of God, who would be given for our very worst. What an incredible thing. And so, here we see the anointing of Jesus. And Mary humbly does it. She even wipes his feet with her hair. I imagine she's got a rather long ponytail. You know, our granddaughter, she's got one down to the, she just about sits on it. And I imagine that's what Mary's would have been. Can't imagine that. But there she is, wiping his feet. She is too humble to pour it upon his head. And I think that's how we come before the Lord. Not that we're good enough to stand over Jesus and pour oil on him and say, oh, we make you be our Christ. But rather we come humbly to his feet and say, Lord, would you be our Christ? There is this tremendous humility there. Now the story plays out. It says that the perfume filled the house. I can only just imagine sweet smelling fragrance. I think very quickly everyone would have known what Mary had done. Now Judas Iscariot gets a mention here. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him. As you read the Gospel of John, who is the apostle of love, has a real problem with Judas. And this isn't the only time he says it like this. This is Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, the one who would betray him. You can really see it coming through in the scriptures. John does not like Judas at all. I can't say as I blame him, and I actually feel good that he feels that way, because sometimes I get, yeah. So anyway, he's got that going on. He says, Judas Iscariot, who would later betray him, objects to it. Oh, what? Why wasn't this sold and the money given to the poor? Oh yes, you can just see that. Put a year's worth of money into that purse that I can pilfer. Wonderful, yeah. Yeah, John's got no delusions there. But it throws up a very interesting contrast for me. Because here is Judas condemning Mary for pouring what we are told is worth about 300 silver coins, or about a year's worth of wages in those days. Just pouring it out on the feet of Jesus in devotion. And then a few days later, for 1/10 that amount, for 30 silver coins, not 300, for about a month's worth of labour, not a year's worth, he sells his Lord and betrays him. Wow. That is a contrast, isn't it? And I think there is a challenge in that to us. Because as I understand it, discipleship does not count the cost. That if you truly love the Lord with your heart, you don't sit about and say, oh, I've given the Lord so much. But rather, you give freely of yourself. You give freely of your time. You give freely and without thought of your money. Because your treasure is in heaven and not on earth. And that stands in stark contrast with Judas, who would later betray Jesus for only a fraction of what Mary was prepared to give. That Judas was counting the coins for his own benefit. But Mary was counting the joy for eternity. And I believe we all need to be challenged that way. There is an interesting response as we get to the close of this passage. Leave her alone, says Jesus. And literally that's what it means. But sometimes we get that phrase, leave alone, and it becomes forgive, to leave it behind, to not put that charge against another person. That this is, in fact, the message of the cross. That when we come to the cross, we come to the foot of the cross. And we pour ourselves out before our Lord. And that we leave alone our sins. And we go away forgiven. This is the gospel message. That there is forgiveness at the foot of the cross.